The universe is approximately 13.8 billion years old. It is a sprawling, indifferent expanse of cold vacuum and nuclear fire governed by the second law of thermodynamics. And the truth is, it doesn't care about you. Not in a cruel way, just in the way a hurricane doesn't care about your picnic. Stars collapse into black holes, civilizations rise and crumble into dust, and entire species blink out of existence without so much as a Wikipedia footnote. And yet, against that cosmic indifference, humans keep building cathedrals, writing symphonies, launching rockets, and also arguing about whether pineapples belong on pizza. The scale of human endeavor swings wildly from the sublime to the stupefyingly trivial. This brings us to the central paradox of our existence. We are biologically wired to crave significance. We want to be seen, heard, and remembered. Yet we have built a modern civilization where we are drowning in content but starving for attention. We assume that if we are just talented enough or kind enough or work hard enough, the world will naturally take notice. We think visibility is based on meritocracy. It is not. Out of the 117 billion humans who have ever lived, how many do you know by name? A few hundred? This isn't a failure of character. It's the default setting of reality. Entropy wins. Noise drowns signal. And history, the grand sweeping ledger of human achievement, has a brutal edit button. It deletes almost everyone. So what's the only thing standing between you and total erasure? To stop being invisible. You look at the famous, the loud, and the memorable, and you assume they were born with some genetic gift that makes them immune to embarrassment. You think your desire to blend into the background is a personal failing, a lack of confidence, or a sign that you are just boring. Actually, it is the exact opposite. Your desire to be invisible is not a defect. It is a high-performance survival feature. Here's the thing, for 99% of human history, standing out got you killed. Evolution didn't select for the most original thinker. It selected for the ones who stayed in the middle of the herd. Let's look at the zebra. Why the stripes? Zoologists call it dazzle camouflage. The stripes aren't designed to hide the zebra from the environment. They are designed to hide the zebra into the herd. When a herd of zebras runs together, the massive moving stripes creates an optical illusion that makes it impossible for a predator to single out one individual target. The lion can't focus. It just sees a big, swirling blob of headache. You are that zebra. Your brain is wired to melt into the pattern, not disrupt it. But here is the problem. Today, the predators aren't lions, they're algorithms, attention economies, and indifference. And in this new ecosystem, blending in doesn't keep you safe. It erases you. The noise flaw. You probably think if you just produce brilliant work, write the perfect essay, design the flawless app, it'll get noticed. That's the comforting myth modern culture sells. But here's the brutal reality. In a world drowning in content, genius without context is just noise. This isn't about quality. It's about bandwidth. In the 21st century, the cultural noise floor is screaming at roughly 110 decibels. Between TikTok and the relentless ping of notifications, the baseline level of distraction is so high that mere competence doesn't even register on the meter. This is the noise floor. The baseline level of distraction and output so high that anything below it is functionally invisible. And right now, the floor is seismic. Consider Joshua Bell, one of the greatest violinists alive. In 2007, the Washington Post arranged an experiment. Bell, disguised in jeans and a baseball cap, played a 3.5 million Stradivarius in a Washington, D.C. subway station during rush hour. He performed masterpieces by Bach and Schubert, pieces that, in a concert hall, would cost hundreds of dollars to hear. For 45 minutes, he played with the emotional intensity of a man pouring his soul onto the pavement. Here is what happened. 7 people stopped to listen for more than a minute. 27 people threw money in his case, totaling $32. One woman recognized him. The other 1,070 people just walked right past a genius performing a miracle, 3 feet away from their heads. The Washington Post organized this experiment to answer a simple question: do we notice beauty in a banal context? The answer was Joshua Bell fell below the noise floor. Without the tuxedo, the concert hall, and the ticket price, without the framing that told people this is important, he was just noise in a subway station. This is the terrifying reality of the signal-to-noise ratio. You can be Joshua Bell. You can have the Stradivarius. You can have the talent. But if you are playing in the subway of the internet without the right context, you are just another guy in a baseball cap, annoying people on their commute. Context isn't just decoration. It's the difference between being seen and being scrolled past, which raises a terrifying follow-up. If no one's paying attention, why are we so afraid of being seen? The spotlight effect glitch. You think everyone's watching you. When you say something awkward in a meeting, when your voice cracks on a Zoom call, when you post something that gets no likes, that's the spotlight effect, and it's lying to you. It is a cognitive bias, where we dramatically overestimate how much other people notice us. We walk around with a mental model of reality, where we are the protagonist of the movie, and everyone else is just an extra focused on our storyline. In 2000, social psychologist Thomas Gilovich ran a now famous experiment. He asked college students to wear an intentionally embarrassing t-shirt, specifically a bright yellow one with Barry Manilow's face on it, into a room full of their peers. Before entering, the students estimated that about half the room would notice the shirt. They felt the eyes burning into them. Afterward, they were shocked to learn the actual number, only about 20%. The rest were too busy worrying about their own Barry Manilow-level anxieties to even register yours. Think about that. Even when wearing a bright yellow beacon of uncool, 80% of the people were too busy thinking about their own problems to notice yours. The brain inflates your presence in other people's minds because, to you, you're the main character, but everyone else is also the main character of their own story. You're just a background NPC in theirs, which sounds depressing until you realize it's liberating. This glitch is the cage that keeps you invisible. You are agonizing over details that nobody sees. You are editing your personality to avoid a judgment that is never coming. The spotlight effect sounds depressing, but it is actually the most liberating concept in psychology. It means you are free. You are not being judged. You are being ignored. You can trip on the stage. You can stutter in the video. You can release a product that flops, and the world will not point and laugh. The world will just keep scrolling. The stakes are infinitely lower than you think. That idea you're scared is too weird? Pitch it. The worst that happens isn't rejection, it's silence. And silence isn't failure. Silence is the baseline. It's the air you're already breathing. So you might as well speak into it. But if no one's watching, why do we still stay frozen? The Bystander Effect. If no one's watching, why don't we just step forward and act? The answer isn't laziness or even fear. It's a psychological trap called diffusion of responsibility, and it turns you into a spectator in your own story. This is a pervasive belief that when a crisis happens, or conversely, when a great opportunity arises, someone will step in and take charge. We grow up watching movies where the hero arrives at the last second. We internalize this narrative structure so deeply that we start to view our own lives as a spectator sport. We assume that if we are invisible, someone will eventually come along and discover us. But waiting for a savior is a very dangerous game. This isn't just theory. It's been documented in one of the most haunting cases of modern urban history. Late one night, in Queens, New York, Kitty was attacked and stabbed outside her apartment building over a period of 30 minutes. Police reports claimed 38 neighbors witnessed the assault. Some heard her screams through open windows, others saw the struggle from their balconies, and yet nobody called the police. One witness famously said, "I didn't want to get involved." Another assumed it was just a lovers' quarrel. But the psychological mechanism at play here is called the diffusion of responsibility, or the bystander effect. Every single person looking out that window made a rational calculation. There are other lights on. Other people are watching. Someone else has probably already called the cops. I don't need to do it, because everyone assumed someone else would act. Nobody acted. The more witnesses there were, the less likely any single person felt responsible. The burden dissolved into statistical vapor. Now translate that to your creative life. You got an idea. You draft a post. You outline a project. But you don't publish it. You are both the victim and the bystander. And your silence isn't neutrality. It's complicity in your own erasure. The harsh truth is that nobody is coming to save you. Nobody is coming to discover you. The neighbors are watching, but they are not going to call the police. And they are certainly not going to subscribe to your newsletter unless you force them to. You have to break the seal. You have to be the first one to move. But here's the cruel twist. Even if you do act, competence alone won't save you. Chew. Tick, tick, tick. It keeps perfect time. It never misses a beat. It does exactly what it was designed to do with absolute, unwavering precision. It is technically flawless. And yet, nobody buys a ticket to watch a metronome perform. We are taught that competence is the goal. We are told to be reliable, to be professional, to hit our marks. But there is a dark side to being good at your job. If you are perfectly competent, you become part of the infrastructure. To see the tragedy of competence, we have to look at the patron saint of the forgotten, Antonio Salieri. Thanks to the movie Amadeus, most people think of Salieri as a mediocre villain who hated God and killed Mozart. But the historical reality is actually much worse. Salieri wasn't mediocre. He was brilliant. He was the imperial Kapellmeister in Vienna. He was the most powerful musician in Europe. He taught Beethoven, Schubert, and Liszt. He was technically perfect. His operas were hits. He did everything right. And then there was Mozart. Mozart was messy. He was vulgar. He broke the rules of composition. He was erratic. But when Mozart played, people didn't just nod their heads and say, "Good." They felt like their souls were being rewritten. Salieri composed by the book. Mozart shattered it. One gave the court what it expected. The other gave it what it didn't know it needed until it heard it. But in the brutal economy of memory, only the latter survives. This is the curse of competence. The paradox that the better you are at fitting in, the more invisible you become. Organizations love competent people until they need visionaries. Audiences appreciate polish until they're stunned by raw originality. You can be flawless and still be forgotten because flawlessness confirms the status quo, and the status quo is noise. But if breaking the rules is the path to visibility, why is it so painful to do? The conformity press. You know you should speak up. You know you should speak up. You've rehearsed the line in your head a dozen times. But when the moment comes, your throat tightens, your palms sweat, and you say nothing. It's not that you're scared of being wrong. You're scared of being alone. This isn't weakness, it's wiring. The human brain treats social rejection like physical injury. Literally, neuroimaging studies show that being excluded activates the same regions as stubbing your toe or burning your hand. Belonging isn't a luxury, it's a survival reflex. And that reflex is being weaponized against you every day. Nowhere is this clearer than in the Asch conformity experiments of the 1950s. Psychologist Solomon Asch gathered groups of students and asked them a simple visual question. Which of these 3 lines matches the standard line in length? The answer was obvious, like toddler obvious. But here's the twist. Most of the participants were actors instructed to give the wrong answer. The real subjects, seated last, had to choose after hearing the group lie in unison. In the end, 75% of participants gave the wrong answer at least once just to fit in with the group. They denied the evidence of their own eyes to avoid the pain of standing out. 1/3 gave the wrong answer every single time, not because they couldn't see, but because the cost of dissent felt higher than the cost of falsehood. That's the conformity press, the invisible force that compresses individuality into group consensus, not through force, but through the sheer weight of collective silence. It doesn't need to shout. It just needs everyone else to nod. And you're under it right now, in your workplace, your social circle, even your creative pursuits. Every time you mute your opinion to preserve harmony, you're not being polite. You're feeding your own invisibility. But you can't defy the press without knowing your audience. Because visibility isn't for everyone. It's for someone. The Dunbar Limit. We live in the era of going viral. We have convinced ourselves that visibility is a numbers game. We look at influencers with 10 million followers and think, that is what it means to be seen. We assume that if we can't reach the masses, we might as well reach no one. But human beings were not designed for connecting with masses. But here's a biological truth. Your brain can't meaningfully know more than about 150 people, not 150 followers. 50 real relationships, the kind where someone would recognize your voice in a crowded room. This isn't opinion. It's Dunbar's number, a cognitive limit proposed by anthropologist Robin Dunbar after studying primate social groups and human hunter-gatherer societies. And it shows up everywhere. Check the average size of Neolithic villages, Roman military companies, or even modern-day wedding lists. They cluster tightly around 150. In the year 1086, William the Conqueror ordered a massive survey of England, known as the Doomsday Book. He wanted to know exactly who owed what, so he could tax them. It was the most comprehensive census of the Middle Ages. When modern anthropologists analyzed the data, they found something fascinating. The average size of a village was consistently around 150 people. Why? Because beyond that number, trust breaks down. Gossip can't keep everyone aligned. Norms erode. Cooperation falters. You stop being a community and start becoming a crowd. Fast forward 900 years to the 1990s. British anthropologist Robin Dunbar is studying primates. He figures out that there is a cognitive limit to the number of stable social relationships a brain can maintain based on the size of its neocortex. For humans, that number is, you guessed it, 150. This is Dunbar's number. You physically cannot care about more than 150 people. You cannot maintain a reputation with more than 150 people. This sounds limiting, but it is actually the secret to visibility. You do not need to be famous to the world. Need to be indispensable to a village. Every major movement, every scene, and every career starts by capturing a specific Dunbar village. If you are trying to be everything to everyone, you are invisible. But if you focus on becoming the most valuable person to a specific group of 150 people, your department, your local scene, your niche internet forum, you achieve local celebrity. And yet, we're told that success means broadcasting to millions. That's absurd. Millions don't care. Millions can't care. But 150 people can. And if those 150 are the right people, they'll carry your work further than any algorithm ever could. Because local celebrity is the only kind that actually pays the bills in the beginning. But if you're indispensable to a village, how do you avoid becoming just another interchangeable face within it? though. The commoditization. You are one of the 150. Do you show up on time, do good work, and never cause trouble? And yet, you're still invisible. Why? Because availability is not visibility. In fact, the more reliably you conform, the more you become a background utility, like Wi-Fi or Office copy. Necessary, maybe. Noticed? Never. This is the trap of the modern economy, and it was invented in 1913 by Henry Ford. Before the assembly line, craftsmen built cars. Each car was unique, but Ford had a better idea. He wanted to build the Model T. He didn't want craftsmen, he wanted workers. He needed people to perform the exact same motion on the exact same part every single day. Henry Ford didn't just revolutionize manufacturing, he redefined human labor. Workers were no longer craftsmen, they were cogs. Each man stood in one spot performing the same motion over and over, hundreds of times a day. Their individuality wasn't just ignored, it was engineered out of the system. If one worker quit, another could step in without missing a beat. That's the definition of a commodity. Fungible, replaceable, invisible. He famously said, "Any customer can have a car painted any color that he wants so long as it is black." Ford standardized the product, but more importantly, he standardized the human. He turned the worker into a commodity. If you are professional, reliable, and job-ready, you are effectively a standardized part. You are a galvanized screw. You fit perfectly into the corporate machine, which is great for the machine, but terrible for you. If you leave, the machine just reaches into the box of LinkedIn resumes and grabs another one. Invisibility is the price you pay for being easily replaced. To stop being invisible, you have to become a jagged shape that doesn't fit the standard hole. You have to be the part that, if lost, stops the entire machine because there isn't another one in the box. This concludes the biology of why we hide. We are scared monkeys, terrified of judgment, trying to be standard screws in a noisy factory. Now that we understand the trap, let's talk about how to break out of it. Let's talk about the physics of signal. Act 2. The physics of signal. Pattern. Interruption. How do you invade a fortress that is specifically designed to keep you out? How do you get a message into a brain that has spent millions of years evolving a spam filter to ignore people exactly like you? If you attack the front gate with facts and logic, you will fail. The walls are too high. To get in, you don't need a bigger battering ram. You need a better present. We are moving into Act 2, the physics of signal. And the first law of signal is that the brain ignores the predictable. To understand this, we have to go back to the Bronze Age, to the city of Troy. The Greeks had been besieging Troy for 10 years. They tried everything. They tried brute force, they tried starvation, they tried single combat. Nothing worked. The Trojans knew the pattern of war. They knew that if an army is outside your walls, you keep the gate closed. That is the predictable input. So, the Greeks did something insane. They packed up their camp and left. They sailed their ships behind a nearby island, leaving nothing behind but a giant wooden horse. The Trojans looked at this. It didn't look like a weapon. It didn't look like a threat. It looked like an offering to the gods. It was a pattern interrupt, the Trojan brain said. Siege over. War pattern ended. New pattern, free horse. They wheeled the horse inside the gates themselves. They threw a party. And then, once the defenses were down and the city was asleep, the Greek soldiers climbed out of the horse and burned Troy to the ground. Your audience is Troy. Their attention span is the city wall. If you approach them like a salesman, a networker, or a content creator, they know that pattern. They know you want something. You have to be the Trojan horse. You have to present something that looks like a gift entertainment, a story, a joke that bypasses the sales filter. You don't ask for attention. You smuggle your value inside a package that defies expectation. If everyone else is shouting, whispering is a pattern interrupt. If everyone is polished, being raw is a pattern interrupt. You have to break the prediction error of the brain. Until you surprise them, you don't exist. How? You think you need a loud website, a loud personality, and a loud message all the time. You assume that more equals visible. So you highlight every sentence in your book. You put 15 exclamation points in your email subject line, and you wear a neon suit. But if you highlight everything, you highlight nothing. In 1993, Steven Spielberg released Schindler's List. It is a 3-hour film about the Holocaust, shot entirely in stark, brutal black and white. It is a sea of grey misery. But then, about an hour into the film, there is a scene during the liquidation of the Krakow ghetto. Amidst the chaos and the monochromatic grey, we see a little girl walking through the street, and her coat is red. It isn't a bright, cartoonish red. It is a pale, washed-out red. But against the black and white background, it screams like a siren. For the rest of your life, if you see that movie, you will remember the girl in red. She becomes the emotional anchor of the entire film. She represents the innocence being destroyed. Spielberg didn't use color to make the movie pretty. He used the absence of color everywhere else to make that one signal impossible to ignore. Psychologists call this the von Restorff effect, or the isolation effect. It states that an item that stands out like a sore thumb is more likely to be remembered than other items. The mistake you are making is that you are trying to be the red coat and the red background. You are trying to be interesting in every direction at once. To be seen, you must master the art of contrast. If you are in a room full of suits, be the guy in the t-shirt. If you are on a platform full of screaming thumbnails, be the one with the calm white background. You don't need to be loud. You just need to be the only red thing in a black and white world. High agency signaling. Think about a video game, specifically a role-playing game. You walk into a village, and there are two types of people. There are the NPCs, the non-player characters. They stand in one spot. They have a little loop of dialogue. They wait for you to interact with them. They are reactive. Then, there is the player character. The player runs around, breaks pots, accepts quests, and changes the state of the world. In the game of life, 99% of people are signaling that they are NPCs. They are waiting for a quest. They are waiting for a boss to tell them what to do. But human attention is biologically hardwired to follow the player character. We follow high agency. The greatest example of high agency signaling in history comes from a newspaper ad in 1913. Though the exact text is debated, the legend is what matters. Ernest Shackleton was looking for a crew for his Imperial Trans-Antarctic expedition. He didn't post a job listing saying, "Competitive salary, 401k, warm coat provided." He reportedly wrote, "Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return, honor and recognition in case of success." 5,000 men applied. Why? Why would anyone sign up for that? Because Shackleton was signaling that he was going to do something hard. He was signaling that he was the protagonist. He wasn't asking for employees. He was inviting people into an adventure. Most people write their bios, their resumes, and their content like they are apologizing for existing. They signal, "I am safe, I am obedient, please hire me." That is NPC energy. High agency signaling is terrifying because it requires you to state a mission before you have achieved it. It requires you to say, "I am going to the South Pole, who is coming with me?" Even if you don't have a boat yet, people do not follow competence. They follow conviction. If you want to stop being invisible, stop acting like you are waiting for instructions. Skin in the game. Why do banks have big marble columns? Have you ever thought about that? In the age of digital banking, a marble column does nothing. It is expensive, heavy, and functionally useless. So why do they still build them? Why does a lawyer wear a $2,000 suit? Why does a peacock have a tail that makes it incredibly easy for tigers to catch him? Because talk is cheap. Anyone can say, I am trustworthy, or I am successful. Words cost nothing. To prove you are real, you have to do something that is expensive to fake. This is the principle of costly signaling. And nobody understood this better than Hernán Cortés. In 1519, Cortés landed on the coast of Mexico with about 500 men, 16 horses, and 11 ships. His mission was to conquer the Aztec Empire, a civilization of millions. The odds were mathematically impossible. His men knew this. They were terrified. They were whispering about mutiny. They wanted to get back on the boats and go home to Cuba. Cortés knew that as long as the boats were there, his men would have one foot out the door. They were tourists, not conquerors. So, Cortés gave the order. He burned the ships. Technically, he scuttled them, poking holes in the bottom so they sank, but burned the ships sounds cooler. Imagine standing on that beach. You watch your only ride home sink into the ocean. You are now trapped in a hostile land with 500 guys and a lunatic leader. There is no plan B. There is no retreat. You either win or you die. That is a costly signal. Cortés proved instantly that he was all in. In your life, you are probably hoarding lifeboats. You have a backup plan. You are keeping your options open. You are dabbling. The world can smell that. If you are not committed, why should anyone else be? To be visible, you must demonstrate skin in the game. You have to take a risk that shows you believe in your own signal. Maybe it's quitting the safety job. Maybe it's investing your own money. Maybe it's putting your real name on a controversial opinion. If you have no downside, nobody trusts your upside. Pass. You think that if you are nice enough, inoffensive enough, and agreeable enough, you will eventually win everyone over. You treat your reputation like a politician trying to win a swing state. You massage the message until it appeals to the lowest common denominator. But in the physics of attention, the lowest common denominator is 0. If you try to please everyone, you end up with a beige signal. You become background radiation. To generate a real signal, you need friction. You need to be willing to be hated. In 1966, Muhammad Ali was the heavyweight champion of the world. He was young, pretty, and unstoppable. He had everything to lose. And then he did something that no PR consultant would ever advise. He refused to be drafted into the Vietnam War. He didn't just quietly dodge it. He stood up and said, I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong. Overnight, he became the most hated man in America. He was stripped of his title. He was banned from boxing. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He lost his prime years of athleticism. The mainstream media vilified him as a traitor. But here is the physics of what happened next. By becoming a villain to half the country, he became a messiah to the other half. He stopped being just a boxer and became a symbol of the counterculture, of civil rights, and of resistance. If Ali had just gone to war, done his time, and come back, he would have been a great boxer. But he would have been just a boxer. By creating polarization, he became the greatest. This is strategic polarization. A strong brand is defined not by who it includes, but by who it excludes. You have to draw a line in the sand. You have to stand for something so clearly that it actually alienates people who disagree with you. Because those who agree with you, they won't just like you. They will fight for you. They will buy your jersey. They will tell your story. You cannot be a signal if you are afraid of the static. Or the halo effect. Imagine you go to a high-end restaurant. The waiter brings out a steak. It is cooked perfectly, but instead of putting it on a ceramic plate, he slaps it directly onto the dirty table. And instead of a steak knife, he hands you a rusty spoon. Does the steak taste different? Chemically, no. It is the same protein, but your brain will tell you it is garbage. You probably won't even eat it. We like to think we judge things on their substance. We think we judge a book by its text, not its cover. But our brains are lazy. We use a cognitive shortcut called the halo effect. If one thing about a person looks high status or attractive, we assume everything else about them is high quality too. The most brutal example of this happened on September 26, 1960, the first televised presidential debate between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. Nixon was the vice president. He was experienced, knowledgeable, and a master debater. But he had been sick. He refused to wear stage makeup. Under the hot studio lights, he looked pale, sweaty, and shifty. His suit was grey and blended into the background. Remember the noise floor? Kennedy, on the other hand, had just been campaigning in California. He was tan. He was fit. He wore a dark blue suit that popped against the set. He looked like a movie star. Here is the punchline. People who listened to the debate on the radio stripping away the visuals overwhelmingly thought Nixon won. He had the better arguments. He had the substance. But the 70 million people who watched it on TV, they thought Kennedy crushed him. They didn't hear Nixon's arguments. They saw his sweat. They didn't hear Kennedy's policies. They saw his jawline. Kennedy's halo was so bright, it blinded people to the actual text of the debate. This connects back to Joshua Bell in the subway. The violin was the steak. The subway was the dirty table. Kennedy was the steak on fine china. You cannot ignore aesthetics. You cannot say, my work speaks for itself. It doesn't. Your website, your clothes, your lighting, your typography. These are the delivery mechanisms for your value. If you wrap your genius in a sweaty grey suit, the world will assume you are Nixon. Care. It is a shiny rock. It is pressurized carbon. You can't eat it. You can't drive it. It doesn't keep you warm. If you found one on another planet, you might use it as a drill bit, but you wouldn't trade your life savings for it. So why are we convinced that this useless rock is the ultimate symbol of eternal love? Because a company told us a story, and we decided to believe it. This is the power of narrative economics. Value is not intrinsic. Value is a story that a group of people agree to believe in. In the 1930s, diamond sales were in the toilet. The Great Depression was on, and nobody wanted to buy useless rocks. The De Beers Diamond Cartel was panic-stricken. They sat on a massive supply of stones that nobody wanted. So, they hired an ad agency. The agency didn't try to sell the features of the diamond. They didn't talk about the refraction index or the Mohs hardness scale. They invented a cultural imperative. They created the slogan, "A diamond is forever." They launched a massive campaign to convince the world that the size of the diamond was directly proportional to the size of your love. They invented the rule that a man should spend 2 months' salary on a ring. They placed diamonds in movies, on the hands of stars. They didn't sell a product, they sold a feeling. They sold the idea that if you buy this rock, your marriage will never die. And it worked. They fundamentally reprogrammed the mating rituals of the human species. Today, you buy a diamond not because it is rare, it actually isn't that rare, but because the story is so deeply embedded in your operating system that you feel guilty if you don't buy one. This is the lesson. You are not selling a skill. You are not selling a product. You are selling a story about what that product means. If you are a coder, don't sell clean code. Sell sleeping soundly because the server won't crash. If you are a writer, don't sell words. Sell clarity in a confused world. The market pays for the story, not the carbon, the scarcity principle. We assume that visibility means being everywhere, all the time. We think the goal is omnipresence. We want to be on every platform, in every feed, and in every conversation. We treat our presence like oxygen. We think the more of it there is, the better. But look at the economics of oxygen. It is essential for life. But because it is everywhere, it is free. Nobody pays for air unless they are underwater. If you want to be valued, you cannot be oxygen. You have to be gold. You have to be scarce. Let's talk about the most famous painting in the world, the Mona Lisa. You think the Mona Lisa is famous because it is the best. You think it is about the brushstrokes or the enigmatic smile. Actually, before 1911, the Mona Lisa was just a painting. It was a well-respected Da Vinci, sure, but it wasn't an icon. Tourists didn't line up for hours to see it. It was just hanging on the wall between two other paintings. Then, on a Monday morning, in August 1911, a handyman named Vincenzo Perugia walked into the Louvre, took the painting off the wall, hid it under his smock, and walked out. For 24 hours, nobody even noticed it was gone. That is how invisible the Mona Lisa was. But once the news broke, the world went insane. The newspapers ran front-page stories about the empty space. People lined up at the Louvre just to stare at the hook where the painting used to be. The absence of the Mona Lisa made it a global celebrity. When it was finally recovered 2 years later, it wasn't just a painting anymore. It was the Mona Lisa. This is the scarcity principle. We value what we might lose. If you're always available, always posting, always saying yes, you dilute your own stock. You become the wallpaper. Sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is to disappear for a while, to go dark, to let people miss you, to let them stare at the empty hook on the wall and realize how much they needed you. In an age of abundance, availability is a commodity. Scarcity is power. Emotional contagion. Imagine you are sitting in a boring meeting. The air is stale. Suddenly, the person across from you lets out a massive, jaw-cracking yawn. What happens to you? Almost instantly, you feel the tickle in your own throat. Your jaw muscles tighten. You try to fight it, but you can't. You yawn, and then the person next to you yawns. It ripples through the room like a wave. You didn't decide to yawn. Your mirror neurons hijacked your brain and forced you to sync up with the person across from you. This is a biological hardwire called emotional contagion, and it applies to a lot more than just yawning. It applies to fear, to laughter, and to the feeling that something is important. The most terrifying example of this happened in Strasbourg in July of 1518. A woman named Frau Trophia walked into a narrow street and started dancing. There was no music. She wasn't performing. She was just dancing, fervently and obsessively. She danced for a few hours. Then she kept going. By the end of the week, 34 other people had joined her. Within a month, there were 400 people dancing in the streets. They couldn't stop. They danced until their feet bled. They danced until they collapsed from exhaustion. Some of them literally danced themselves to death, suffering heart attacks and strokes mid-jig. This was the dancing plague. Historians still argue about the cause. Maybe ergot poisoning. Maybe stress-induced mass hysteria. The sheer intensity of the emotion was so high that it bypassed logic and infected the observers. In the attention economy, information is not viral. Emotion is viral. People do not share facts. They share feelings. They share things that make them feel awe, rage, or joy. These are high arousal emotions. If your work is informative and sensible, it is low arousal. It is a cure for insomnia. To be visible, you have to be a carrier. You have to be Frau Trophia minus the dying part. You have to output a signal so emotionally charged that people catch it just by standing near you. If you aren't feeling it, they won't feel it. You are the tuning fork. Strike it hard. The mere exposure effect. Oh, how many times have you heard a new pop song on the radio and thought, this is trash? It's annoying, it's repetitive, and you hate it. But then you hear it in the grocery store. You hear it in an Uber. You hear it in a TikTok video. And then, 3 weeks later, you catch yourself humming it in the shower. Suddenly, it's a banger. Did the song change? No, the audio file is identical. So why did your brain flip from hate to love? Welcome to the mere exposure effect. The psychological rule is simple. Familiarity breeds affection. The more you see something, the more you like it, simply because it didn't kill you the first time. The greatest monument to this effect stands in the center of Paris. When Gustave Eiffel proposed his tower for the 1889 World's Fair, the cultural elite of France went to war. A group of 300 prominent artists, writers, and architects signed a petition calling it a hateful column of bolted sheet metal. They called it a giddy, ridiculous tower that would humiliate Paris. They said it looked like a factory smokestack. They hated it with a passion that only French intellectuals can muster. One writer, Guy de Maupassant, reportedly ate lunch at the tower's restaurant every day because it was the only place in Paris where you couldn't see the damn thing. But the tower stayed. It stood there, looming over the city day after day. It became part of the skyline. It became the background of every romance, every sunrise, and every photo. Slowly, the hate faded. The monstrosity became a landmark. The landmark became an icon. Today, the Eiffel Tower is the universal symbol of romance and elegance. If you proposed tearing it down now, there would be riots. This is the power of persistence. In the beginning of your journey, people might ignore you. They might even find you annoying. They will say you are cringe. Let them. You don't need to convince them instantly. You just need to stay standing. You need to be the hateful column of sheet metal that refuses to move. If you stick around long enough, your mere existence becomes a signal of quality. Endurance converts annoying into iconic, strategic vulnerability. The pratfall effect. We are raised on the idea that our heroes are statues. We think that to be a great man or a great woman, you must be flawless. You must be composed, elegant, and incapable of error. We curate our Instagram feeds to remove every double chin, every messy room, and every failure, thinking that perfection is the key to admiration. But have you ever tried to be friends with a perfect person? It is exhausting. You don't trust them because they don't feel real. Perfection creates distance. If you want to pull people close, you don't need a filter. You need to trip. Let's go to the Oscars in 2013. Jennifer Lawrence is winning the Academy Award for Best Actress. This is the peak of her career. She is wearing a $4 million Dior couture gown. She looks like a goddess. She walks up the stairs to accept the award, and then she steps on her dress. She falls flat on her face in front of the entire Hollywood elite and millions of viewers worldwide. For a split second, it was horrified silence. But then she buried her face in her hands, laughed, got up, and joked about it. That moment did more for her career than the movie she won the award for. The internet exploded. GIFs of the fall were everywhere. People didn't mock her. They fell in love with her. Why? Because the fall broke the celebrity halo. It signaled, I am rich and beautiful, but I am also a clumsy mess, just like you. Psychologists call this the pratfall effect. It states that If a person is generally competent, making a clumsy mistake actually increases their likability. It creates a bridge of empathy. If you are incompetent and you fall, you're just an idiot. But if you are competent and you fall, you are a human. This is strategic vulnerability. Stop trying to hide your scars. Stop trying to sound like a corporate press release. Your stutter, your bad handwriting, your failed startup, the time you got fired. These are not bugs. They are features. They are the hooks that let people latch onto your humanity. Act 3. The architecture of importance. The structure. Section 21. The power law. Pareto. Picture a rose bush in early spring. It is wild, overgrown, and tangled. There are hundreds of little buds trying to bloom at the same time. It looks lush, but because the plant is splitting its energy 500 ways, all the flowers come out small, weak, and pathetic. If a gardener wants prize-winning roses, they do something that looks cruel. They take a pair of shears, and they cut off 80% of the buds. They kill the potential of the many to save the genius of the few. Shutterstock. We are entering Act 3, the architecture of importance. We know how to signal. Now we have to build something that lasts. And the first step of building is destruction. You are likely suffering from the disease of more. You have 5 projects, 3 side hustles, and a podcast you haven't updated in 6 months. You are diluting your energy. In 1997, Apple was 90 days away from bankruptcy. They were bleeding cash. They had dozens of products, different versions of the Macintosh, printers, scanners, Newtons. Nobody knew what to buy. The product line was a tangled mess. Steve Jobs returned to the company, looked at this mess, and went ballistic. He marched the whiteboard and drew a simple 2x2 grid. He wrote desktop and portable on the top. He wrote consumer and pro on the side. He told the engineers, "We are going to make 4 computers. That's it." He slashed 70% of the product line. He fired thousands of people. He killed projects that engineers had spent years on. It was brutal. But by focusing the entire energy of the company into just 4 products, those 4 products became perfect. They became the iMac and the PowerBook. Apple didn't save itself by doing more. It saved itself by doing less. This is the Pareto principle, or the power law. 80% of your results come from 20% of your efforts. The other 80% of your effort is just heat loss. If you want to be visible, you cannot be a jack of all trades. You have to find your 20%, the one thing you do that actually moves the needle, and you have to brutally murder the rest. You have to cut the weak buds so the big one can bloom. Section 22, Category Design. Why would you ever agree to a fistfight with Mike Tyson? Gia the C. Seriously. If you step into the ring with a heavyweight champion, play by his rules, and try to beat him at boxing, it doesn't matter how hard you train. He has been doing this longer, he is bigger, and he owns the ring. So, if you want to win, what do? You don't box. You bring a chessboard, or a tennis racket, or you invent a new sport entirely where punching is illegal. This is the essence of category design. The biggest mistake people make is trying to be better than the competition. Better is a trap. Better means you are comparing yourself to the market leader, which means they are the standard and you are the cheap knockoff. Don't be better. Be different. In the 1980s, the circus business was dying. It was dominated by Ringling Brothers. The formula was set. 3 rings, elephants, tigers, and cheap tickets for kids. It was a race to the bottom. Enter a Canadian fire eater named Guy Laliberté. He wanted to start a circus, but he couldn't compete with Ringling Brothers on animal acts. Elephants are expensive. So, he didn't try to build a better circus. He broke the category. He eliminated the animals completely. He eliminated the 3 rings. He borrowed elements from Broadway theater, opera, and ballet. He targeted adults, not children. He raised the ticket prices to match the theatre, not the fairground. He called it Cirque du Soleil. Critics were confused. Is it a circus? Is it a play? It was neither. It was a new category. Because it was the only thing in that category, it had no competition. Ringling Brothers couldn't compete with them because they were playing a completely different sport. If you are a writer, don't try to be the next Stephen King. We already have a Stephen King. If you are a consultant, don't try to be McKinsey but cheaper. Create a box so specific that you are the only person who fits inside it. When you design the category, you automatically win the championship. Wow. Section 23. The Seniors. Network. We picture the great artist or the brilliant inventor sitting alone in a candlelit room, isolated from society, until we think solitude is the ingredient for greatness. But if you look at history, greatness almost never happens in isolation. It happens in clusters. It happens in scenes. Brian Eno, the legendary music producer, coined a term for this. Seniors. It is the communal form of genius. It is the intelligence of a whole operation or group of people. Let's look at Paris in the 1860s. The art world was controlled by the Salon, a jury of old, dusty academics who decided what was good art. They liked realistic paintings of history and mythology. Then you had a group of rejects. Monet, Renoir, Degas, Pissarro. The Salon hated them. They couldn't get their work displayed. They were invisible. If they had stayed home and painted alone, they would have died forgotten. Instead, they met every week at the Café Guébois. They drank, they argued, they critiqued each other's work, and they shared techniques. They created a micro-society. They became a scene. Because they were a group, they had gravity. They organized their own exhibition. They created their own critics. They validated each other when the world told them they were trash. Together, they invented Impressionism, the most valuable art movement in history. You cannot maintain a category of one forever. You need a tribe. You need a seniors. If you are trying to be visible from your bedroom, you are playing on hard mode. You need to find the Café Guébois of your industry. It might be a Discord server, a subreddit, or a literal coffee shop. You need to embed yourself in an ecology of talent. When the tide rises for the scene, it lifts all the boats. Stop trying to be a genius. Go find your seniors. Oh. Section 24. The Matthew Effect. Think about the board game Monopoly. In the beginning, everyone has the same amount of money. You go around the board, you buy a few properties. It's fairly even. But then, one player gets a lucky roll. They buy Boardwalk and Park Place. They put a hotel on it. Suddenly, the game changes. Because they have the hotel, they get more rent. Because they get more rent, they can buy more houses. Because they buy more houses, they get even more rent. Within 10 minutes, that player is unstoppable, and everyone else is mortgaging their waterworks just to survive. This is not just a game mechanic. This is a fundamental law of the universe. Sociologists call it the Matthew Effect, named after the Bible verse in the book of Matthew. For to everyone who has will, more be given. Success acts as a magnet for more success. Advantage accumulates. The ultimate example of this is Bill Gates. We like to think Bill Gates became the richest man in the world just because he was smart. And he was smart, but lots of people are smart. Bill Gates had an advantage that compounded. In 1968, he went to Lakeside School in Seattle. It was one of the only high schools in the world that had access to a teletype terminal connected to a mainframe computer. Most colleges didn't even have this. Bill Gates had unlimited access to a computer at age 13. By the time he dropped out of Harvard to start Microsoft, he didn't just have passion. He had reportedly logged 10,000 hours of programming time. He was miles ahead of every other student in the country. Not because of his brain, but because of his access. That early advantage allowed him to write the software for the Altair, which allowed him to get the contract with IBM, which allowed him to dominate the world. The lesson here is not, be lucky. You can't control luck. The lesson is to leverage your early wins immediately. If you get a tiny bit of visibility, a viral post, a small award, a good client, do not sit on it. Reinvest it. Use that small credibility to buy a bigger ticket. Use the Matthew effect to snowball your way up. You have to build the hotel on Boardwalk the second you have the cash. Pass. Section 25. Owning a word. Linguistic real estate. What is the most expensive real estate in the world? Is it a penthouse in Manhattan? Is it a private island in the Caribbean? Is it a server farm in Silicon Valley? No. The most valuable real estate in the world is a slot in the human dictionary. If you can occupy a specific word in the mind of the public, you own a mental monopoly that is virtually impossible to break. Let's talk about the ultimate victory in branding, Google. In the late 90s, there were a dozen search engines. There was Lycos, Alta Vista, Yahoo, Ask Jeeves. They were search engines. That was the noun. You would say, I am going to use Lycos to search for this. But Google did something different. Their product was so clean, so fast, and so dominant that the brand name dissolved into the action itself. They transitioned from a noun to a verb. Nobody says, I am going to perform a web search for this recipe. They say, I'm going to Google it. When you become the verb, you are no longer a business. You are language. You are infrastructure. Even if you use a different search engine, you probably still say you are Googling something. This is the goal. You want to own a word. Volvo owns safety. FedEx owns overnight. Xerox owns copying. When you are starting out, you are tempted to say, I do everything. I am a creative, strategic consultant guru ninja. That is word salad. You own nothing. You need to pick one word, one concept, and you need to hammer that concept until your name and that word are synonymous. If I say electric car, you think Elon. If I say horror movie, you think Stephen King. If you want to be visible, you have to be narrow. You have to claim your linguistic real estate and defend it until you become the verb. Prize. Section 26. The flywheel effect. Most people treat their career like they are pushing a boulder up a hill. You push, you strain, you sweat to get a project done. Then you release it. The boulder rolls down the other side, and you have to walk back to the bottom and find a new boulder to push. It is a linear, exhausting process. Input equals output. If you stop pushing, the movement stops. This is why you feel burned out. You are manually powering your own visibility every single day. But the smartest operators don't push boulders. They build flywheels. A flywheel is a heavy wheel that takes a lot of energy to get moving. But once it starts spinning, it stores that kinetic energy. Its own momentum makes it spin faster and faster with less and less effort. Getty Images. The master of the flywheel is Amazon. In the early days, Jeff Bezos sketched a diagram on a napkin. It wasn't a linear business plan. It was a loop. Here is the loop. Lower prices lead to more customer visits. More customers attract more third-party sellers. More sellers increase the selection of products. Better selection. And lower prices improve the customer experience, which leads to more customers, which leads to lower cost structure, which leads to lower prices. Every part of the business fed the next part. He didn't have to push the marketing. The low prices were the marketing. The sellers were the selection. The machine spun itself. You need to look at your own work. Are your projects disconnected boulders? Or does Project A naturally create the audience for Project B? If you write a blog post, does it feed your newsletter? Does the newsletter sell your course? Does the course generate testimonials that bring people back to the blog? You need to design a system where the output of one action becomes the input of the next. Stop pushing. Build a wheel that wants to spin. Poor. Section 27. Intellectual property as equity. Imagine you are a hamster running on a wheel. You are a very fast, very talented hamster. You run harder than any other rodent in the cage. As long as you run, the wheel spins and you get a pellet of food. But the second you stop running, maybe you get sick. Maybe you want to take a nap. Maybe you die. The food stops. This is the life of 99% of the workforce. We trade time for money. We are service providers. And the problem with providing a service is that you are the machine. If the machine breaks, the revenue hits zero. To stop being invisible, you have to stop being the machine and start owning the machine. The greatest business move in the history of Hollywood explains this perfect. The year is 1973. George Lucas is fresh off the success of American Graffiti. He is negotiating with 20th Century Fox to make a weird space opera called Star Wars. The studio offers him a standard deal. They want to pay him a salary of $500,000 to direct the movie. That was a lot of money in the 70s. But Lucas does something insane. He tells the studio, keep your money. Pay me $150,000 instead. Fox executives probably laughed in their board meetings. They thought he was an idiot. They saved $350,000. But Lucas added a small clause to the contract. In exchange for the pay cut, he wanted to retain the licensing and merchandising rights. Fox agreed immediately. At the time, movie merchandise meant selling a few t-shirts. It was worthless. We all know what happened next. Star Wars became the biggest cultural phenomenon in history. But the money didn't come from the box office. It came from the toys, the lunch boxes, the video games. By 2012, Star Wars merchandise had generated over $27 billion. George Lucas didn't trade his time for a salary. He created an asset, intellectual property, that generated value while he slept. If you are a freelancer, a consultant, or an employee, you are invisible because your output is tied to your presence. To become visible, you must codify your knowledge, turn your service into a product. Write the book, record the course, patent the method. Build something that exists in the world without you. Don't rent your skills. Own the equity. Section 28. Radical generosity. How much is a human life worth? No, really. If you held the patent for air, how much would you charge people to breathe? If you look at the pharmaceutical industry today, the answer is whatever the market will bear. We assume that the ultimate goal of visibility and success is to extract maximum value. We think the winner is the guy with the highest score in the bank account. But there is a level of fame that money cannot buy. It is purchased with a different currency, radical generosity. Let's go back to the 1950s. Polio was the nightmare of the world. It paralyzed thousands of children every year. It was a terrifying, random plague. Penta, Jonas Salk. He spends years in the lab, working 18-hour days to develop a vaccine. Finally, in 1955, he succeeds. He has the cure. He effectively holds the keys to life and death for millions of children. He could have been the richest man in history. He could have patented the vaccine and charged a premium. In a famous television interview, Edward R. Murrow asked Salk, who owned the patent on this vaccine? Salk didn't talk about ROI. He didn't talk about shareholders. He looked at the camera and said, well, the people, I would say. There is no patent. Could you patent the sun? He gave it away, for free. By refusing to monetize his discovery, Salk lost out on an estimated $7 billion. But in exchange, he gained immortality. He became a secular saint. He wasn't just a scientist anymore. He was a savior. This seems counterintuitive to the George Lucas example, but it's the other side of the same coin. Lucas owned the asset to build leverage. Salk gave the asset away to build legacy. When you give away your best work, your best ideas, your best content for free, You create a debt of gratitude. You signal that you are so abundant with talent that you don't need to hoard it. People trust the person who feeds them more than the person who bills them. Sometimes, the price of being remembered forever is giving the work away for $0. Cool. Section 29, the connector strategy. Most people think networking is about collecting contacts. You go to a mixer, you hand out business cards, and you add people on LinkedIn until your number looks impressive. You think that knowing a lot of people makes you a connector. But having a list of names is not a network. It's a database. And a database doesn't make you a legend. To understand the difference between knowing people and connecting people, we have to look at the midnight ride of Paul Revere. We all know the story. Paul Revere rides through the night shouting, "The British are coming!" The militia wakes up, and the American Revolution begins. But here is the part history class left out. Paul Revere wasn't the only rider that night. There was another man named William Dawes. William Dawes carried the exact same message. He left at the same time. He rode through just as many towns. But you had never heard of William Dawes. Why? Because William Dawes was just a guy with a horse. When he knocked on a door, people said, "Who are you?" He had to spend time explaining himself. He didn't know which doors belonged to the local militia leaders. He just knocked randomly. Getty Images. Paul Revere, on the other hand, was an information broker. He was a silversmith who knew everyone. He knew the dock workers, the masons, and the politicians. When he arrived in a town, he didn't knock on random doors. He rode straight to the house of the most influential person in that village, a person he already knew. Because he bridged the structural holes between different social groups, his message spread like wildfire. Dawes's message died on the doorstep. The lesson is that visibility is not about how many people you know. It is about the topology of your network. Are you connecting clusters of people who wouldn't otherwise talk to each other? Are you the bridge between the artists and the engineers? Between the investors and the operators? Don't just collect dots. Be the line that connects them. The person who bridges the gap gets the credit for the traffic. Section 30. Mastery as leverage. It looks beautiful from a distance. The cables are painted gold, the lights are sparkling, and there is a great PR team marketing the bridge. But if you drive a truck over it and the concrete is weak, the bridge collapses. No amount of marketing, networking, or high-agency signaling can save a bridge that defies the laws of physics. We have spent a lot of time talking about signal, story, and psychology, but we have to address the elephant in the room. If your product sucks, visibility just helps you fail faster. You need undeniable quality. You need mastery. Let's look at a tiny restaurant in a Tokyo subway station. It has 10 seats. The bathroom is outside. It doesn't have a view. By all logical metrics, this place should be a dive bar. But a meal there costs $300, and you have to book a reservation months in advance. This is Tsukiyabashi Jiro, the restaurant of Jiro Ono. Jiro is not a marketer. He is an obsessive. He has spent decades doing one thing. He massages the octopus for exactly 45 minutes to soften the texture. He measures the temperature of the rice to match the body temperature of the customer. He has an apprentice whose only job for 10 years was to learn how to cook an egg. Jiro isn't visible because he is loud. He is visible because he is undeniably the best. This brings us back to the noise floor. The world is full of pretty good noise. The only way to cut through the noise permanently is to operate at a frequency of quality that others physically cannot match. If you are a writer, write sentences that make people stop breathing. If you are a coder, write code that is elegant. Mastery is the ultimate leverage. It is the only safety net. If you strip away the story, the brand, and the network, the work must be able to stand on its own 2 feet. If the sushi isn't perfect, Jiro is just an old man in a basement. Pass. Section 31, the Magnum Opus. When you are dead, what will represent you? What is the physical evidence that you were here? Will it be your email outbox? Will it be a collection of Slack messages saying, circling back on this? Will it be a series of quarterly reports that got shredded 5 years ago? Most of us spend our lives doing maintenance work. We keep the lights on, but maintenance work evaporates the moment you stop doing it. To be remembered, you need to build something that exists outside of time. You need a Magnum Opus, a great work. Let's talk about Lin-Manuel Miranda. In 2008, he was already successful. He had a hit Broadway show, In the Heights. He could have just kept churning out similar plays. He could have ridden the wave. Instead, he went on vacation, picked up a biography of Alexander Hamilton, a boring, dead Treasury Secretary. He spent the next 7 years of his life working on one project. People thought he was insane. A hip-hop musical about the Founding Fathers? It sounded like a bad Saturday Night Live sketch. He spent an entire year writing one song. He agonized over every syllable. He poured his entire identity, his knowledge of history, and his musical talent into this one vessel. When Hamilton launched, it wasn't just a play. It was a cultural nuclear bomb. It changed the way we look at history. It won the Pulitzer. It will be performed 100 years from now. If Lin-Manuel had spent those 7 years answering emails and doing reasonable work, he would be a footnote. Because he concentrated his force into a Magnum Opus, he became a chapter heading. You need a flagship. You need one project, a book, a company, a theory, a building that serves as the anchor for your entire reputation. You can do small things, sure, but you need one big thing that screams, I was here, long after you have left the room. Act 4, The Entropy of Memory, The Legacy, Section 32, The Lindy Effect. We are obsessed with the new. We think that to be relevant, we have to chase the latest trend. We have to dance to the trending audio, use the trending hashtags, and talk about the current news cycle. We think that timely equals important, but in the grand timeline of history, timely usually means temporary. If you chase the news, you become the news here today, wrapped in fish tomorrow. If you want to survive, you shouldn't be looking at what's new. You should be looking at what's old. This is a concept called the Lindy Effect. It is a theory of longevity that states, for non-perishable things, like ideas, books, and technologies, the expected future lifespan is proportional to its current age. Basically, if a book has been in print for 1 year, it will probably last 1 more year. If a book has been in print for 2,000 years, it will probably last 2,000 more. Consider the Odyssey by Homer. It was written around the 8th century BC. It has survived the collapse of Greece, the fall of Rome, the Dark Ages, and the invention of TikTok. Because it has survived this long, we can statistically bet it will outlive everyone watching this video. Why? Because it speaks to fundamental human truths: war, home, loss, adventure. Contrast that with the Top 10 Marketing Trends of 2024 article. That article will be obsolete in 6 months. It has a high mortality rate. If you want to stop being invisible, stop trying to be cutting edge. Cutting edge dulls quickly. Try to be classic. Base your work on the things that haven't changed in 1,000 years. Human psychology, physics, emotion, storytelling. Don't write about the specific software update. Write about the frustration of technology. Don't build for the trend, build for the Lindy Effect. The older your references, the longer your future. Section 33, Documentation. If a tree falls in the forest and nobody is around to hear it, does it make a sound? Physics says yes. It creates a pressure wave in the atmosphere. But history says no. In the context of human memory, if a tree falls and nobody records it, that tree never existed. It is firewood. We assume that genius is self-evident. We think that if we do great work, the universe will intuitively know about it. But the universe is terrible at taking notes. The universe is an entropy machine designed to erase your hard drive. To defeat entropy, you must embrace the unsexy art of documentation. Consider Leonardo da Vinci. We think of him as the archetypal genius, the painter, the inventor, the anatomist. But do you know why we know he was a genius? It isn't just because of the Mona Lisa or the Last Supper. There are plenty of great painters whose names we have forgotten. We know the depth of his mind because he was a compulsive hoarder of paper. Leonardo left behind thousands of pages of notebooks. He wrote down everything. He sketched water turbulence. He designed helicopters. He made to-do lists that included things like describe the tongue of the woodpecker. He documented his failures, his half-baked ideas, and his grocery lists. If Leonardo had just done the work without writing it down, we would think he was just a talented painter who liked to stare at birds. Because he documented his process, we can see the machinery of his mind 500 years later. Most people do the work and throw away the receipt. They solve a complex problem at work and move on. They have a brilliant insight in the shower and let it wash down the drain. This is a tragedy. If you do not document your process, you are killing your own legacy. You are relying on oral history. An oral history is a game of telephone that ends with you being forgotten. Write it down. Record the video. Save the sketch. Documentation is the fossil record of your value. It is the only proof that you were actually here and that you were paying attention. If it isn't written down, it didn't happen. P. Section 34. Institutionalization. Here is a morbid question. What happens to your mission the day after your funeral? You spend 50 years fighting for a cause, building a philosophy, or serving a community. Then your heart stops. Does the mission stop too? Does all that kinetic energy just dissipate into the ground? For most people, the answer is yes. When the engine dies, the car stops. But the true masters of visibility build a car that drives itself. They don't just build careers, they build institutions. In 1859, a Swiss businessman named Henry Dunant was traveling through Italy. He stumbled upon the aftermath of the Battle of Solferino. It was a slaughterhouse. 40,000 soldiers were dead or wounded, rotting in the sun, with nobody to help them. Dunant was horrified. He spent days trying to organize local civilians to bring water and wash wounds. Most people would have gone home, told a story at a dinner party, and moved on. Dunant did something different. He realized that his personal presence wasn't enough. He needed a system that would function, whether he was there or not. He wrote a book proposing a neutral organization dedicated to caring for the wounded in war. He lobbied governments. He wrote the bylaws. He created the International Committee of the Red Cross. Henry Dunant died in 1910. But today, over 100 years later, if a war breaks out anywhere on Earth, the Red Cross is there. The machine he built is still running. It is still saving lives. It has outlived his body, his money, and his enemies. This is institutionalization. It is the act of embedding your values into an organization. It is turning a personality cult into a bureaucracy. That sounds boring, but bureaucracies are robust. They survive. If you want to be truly invisible to death, you must build a structure that doesn't need your pulse to operate. Sex. Section 35. Eponymy. We think that if you are a good person, history will remember you fondly. If you are a bad person, history will condemn you. We believe in karma, but history is not a judge. History is a brand manager, and sometimes you can buy a rebrand at the very last second. Let's talk about Alfred Nobel. You know the name. You associate it with the Nobel Prize, the pinnacle of human achievement, peace, literature, and science. You think of Alfred Nobel as a benevolent philanthropist who loved humanity. But for most of his life, Alfred Nobel was known as the Merchant of Death. He invented dynamite. He made a massive fortune selling explosives to militaries. He was the arms dealer of the 19th century. In 1888, Alfred's brother, Ludwig, died in France. But a French newspaper made a mistake. They thought Alfred had died. They published his obituary under the headline, "The Merchant of Death is dead." It went on to say, Dr. Alfred Nobel, who became rich by finding ways to kill more people faster than ever before, died yesterday. Alfred read this. He looked at the newspaper and realized, this is my legacy. I am going to be remembered as a monster. He was horrified. So, he used his massive fortune to hack history. He rewrote his will, setting aside 94% of his assets to establish the Nobel Prizes. He effectively paid history to change the adjective next to his name, and it worked. Today, nobody thinks of dynamite. They think of peace. This is the power of eponymy, attaching your name to something greater than yourself. Nobel realized that if you don't name something after yourself, the world will name you after your worst mistake. You have the power to edit the script, even in the final act. You can buy the naming rights to your own memory. Brian. Section 36. Mentorship, the biological legacy. Think of a virus. A virus is a terrifyingly efficient biological machine. It doesn't have a brain, it doesn't have a body, and it doesn't have a retirement plan. Its only goal is to inject its source code into a host cell, hijack that cell's machinery, and use it to replicate itself. The virus lives on by becoming part of the host. Ideas work the same way. If you keep your wisdom in your own head, it dies with you. That is a genetic dead end. To achieve immortality, you have to act like a virus. You have to infect a host. We call this mentorship, the most powerful chain of intellectual infection in human history started in Athens. Socrates never wrote a book. He never started a school. Technically, he should be invisible. But Socrates infected a young wrestler named Plato. He transferred his source code, his method of questioning, his philosophy into Plato's brain. Plato then wrote it all down, documentation, and started a school, Institutionalization. But more importantly, Plato infected a student named Aristotle. Aristotle took the code, upgraded it, and then became the private tutor for a young prince named Alexander. Alexander the Great then went out and conquered the known world, spreading Greek culture and the ideas of his intellectual grandfathers from Egypt to India. Because of this chain, we still talk about the Socratic method today. Socrates lives on because he successfully replicated his mind in a younger host. This is the biological legacy. You can build buildings, you can write books, but nothing carries a signal as well as another human being. If you want to stop being invisible, you must become a mentor. You must find someone younger, hungrier, and smarter than you, and you must give them everything you know. You are not training the competition. You are backing up your hard drive to a fresh server. Or. Section 37. The monument. Why are we so obsessed with heavy things? Pyramids, cathedrals, statues. Why do we spend billions of dollars and millions of man-hours dragging giant rocks into piles? Is it just vanity? Or is it a desperate attempt to defeat the only thing we fear more than death? Paper rots. Digital files get corrupted. Institutions become corrupt. But a mountain is a pretty safe bet. If you want to send a message to the year 12,000, you don't write a blog post. You carve it in stone. This was the logic of Gutzon Borglum. You might not know his name, but you know his work. He was the sculptor of Mount Rushmore. Borglum wasn't just an artist. He was an egomaniac, obsessed with the colossal. He didn't want to make a statue that would end up in a museum basement. He wanted to scar the face of the earth so deeply that future civilizations would have no choice but to acknowledge us. He chose Mount Rushmore because it was granite, which erodes at a rate of roughly 1 inch every 10,000 years. He spent 14 years blasting 450,000 tons of rock off the mountain. He carved the faces of Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt, and Lincoln, 60 feet high. Critics called it vandalism. Environmentalists hated it. Native Americans, rightfully, viewed it as a desecration of sacred land. But Borglum understood the physics of the monument. He knew that long after the United States has fallen, long after the English language is forgotten, those faces will still be staring out over South Dakota. They are too big to ignore and too heavy to move. I am not saying you need to dynamite a mountain, but you do need to understand the concept of the monument. In a world of digital ephemeral content, there is immense power in physical persistence. A book is a monument. A building is a monument. A physical product is a monument. Sometimes, to be visible, you just need to make something heavy. Roll. Section 38, Myth-making. We think it is a dry, objective record of what actually happened. We assume that if we look up George Washington in a biography, we are reading the truth. But history is not what happened. History is what gets repeated. And the things that get repeated are rarely facts. They are myths. Let's look at the most famous story about the first American president, George Washington, and the cherry tree. You know the story. Young George receives a hatchet as a gift. He chops down his father's favorite cherry tree. When his angry father confronts him, George says, "I cannot tell a lie. I did it with my little hatchet." His father embraces him, proud of his honesty. It is a beautiful story. It defines Washington's character as the ultimate honest man. There is just one problem. It never happened. Washington never chopped down a cherry tree. The story was completely fabricated by one of Washington's first biographers, a man named Parson Weems. Weems was a traveling book agent who wanted to sell a bestseller. He knew that a dry list of battles and political policies was boring. He needed a legend, so he invented one, and the lie worked. The myth of the cherry tree is more famous than 90% of the actual things Washington did. It is the operating system for how we view him. This is the power of myth-making. The facts of your life are messy, boring, and contradictory. To be remembered, you need to curate a mythos. You need to simplify the narrative. You need to identify the stories that define your values, even if you have to polish them a little bit, and repeat them until they become the truth. You are not just a protagonist of your life. You are the editor. If you leave the editing to someone else, you might end up with a story you don't like. Or worse, no story at all. Puss. Section 39. The Peak. End Rule. For 13 days, it is paradise. The sun is shining, the drinks are cold, and the ocean is perfect. But on the very last day, you lose your wallet, miss your flight, and get food poisoning at the airport. When you look back on that trip a year later, what is the first thing you remember? You don't remember the 13 days of bliss. You remember the vomiting at gate B12. This is a cognitive bias called the peak end rule. Psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Barbara Fredrickson discovered that human beings do not judge an experience by the average of every moment. We judge it by two specific points: the emotional peak, the most intense moment, and the ending. Everything else is blurred out. The most dramatic example of the peak end rule in modern celebrity is Princess Diana. Diana's life was messy. It was full of tabloid scandals, divorce, eating disorders, and royal infighting. If she had lived to be 80, fading away into a quiet old age, her legacy would be complex and diluted. But her story ended with a shock. the car crash in Paris, the sudden, tragic, and total interruption of a life, and then the funeral, the sea of flowers, Elton John playing Candle in the Wind, the image of her two young sons walking behind the casket. That ending was so emotionally overwhelming, such a massive peak and end combined, that it retroactively purified her entire narrative. She became the people's princess. The messiness was forgotten. The tragedy cemented her sainthood. I am not suggesting you need a tragic ending. Please don't do that. But you must understand that how you leave a room, a job, or a career defines how you are remembered. Most people let things fizzle out. They stay at the party too long. They cling to the spotlight until they are asked to leave. To control your visibility, you must curate your exit. Stick the landing. Leave while people still want more. The ending is the final frame of the movie, and it is the one the audience takes home with them. 2. Section 40. The last words. What is the absolute final signal you will ever transmit? In the moment before the screen goes black, before the consciousness dissolves, you have one last chance to close the loop, one last chance to summarize the meaning of your existence. We are obsessed with famous last words. We love them because they feel like the ultimate truth. Et tu, brute? Kiss me, Hardy. Either that wallpaper goes, or I do. But what happens if you mess it up? Albert Einstein was, arguably, the smartest human being of the 20th century. He changed our understanding of time, space, and gravity. He was a communicator of unparalleled clarity. On April 18, 1955, Einstein lay dying in Princeton Hospital. It was late at night. He was 76 years old. In his final moments, he muttered a few words. He spoke his final sentence to the universe. But there was a problem. The nurse on duty, a woman named Alberta Rosel, didn't speak German. Einstein spoke his last words in his native tongue. The nurse just heard mumbling. And then he died. Those words are gone forever. The greatest genius of our age died leaving a message that nobody received. It was a transmission error at the finish line. This is the ultimate lesson of entropy. Even Einstein is not immune to the noise floor. This brings us to the end of our system. You cannot leave your legacy to chance. You cannot assume the nurse speaks German. You cannot assume the world will figure it out. You have to be clear. You have to say what you mean, and you have to say it now while the microphone is still on. Don't wait for the deathbed. Your last words should be spoken every day in your work, your art, and your actions. Make your signal so redundant, so clear, and so loud that even if the nurse doesn't understand, the walls will remember. Or, Section 41, Conclusion. The Burning Monk. We have spent the last 2 hours talking about how to be visible so you can get what you want. We talked about status, money, attention, legacy, and immortality. We framed visibility as a way to feed the ego, to ensure that I am not forgotten. But this is a misunderstanding of the ultimate purpose of visibility. The highest form of signal isn't about self-preservation. It is about self-sacrifice. You stop being invisible the moment you decide that your message is more important than your life. On June 11th, 1963, a 66-year-old Buddhist monk named Thich Quang Duc sat down in the middle of a busy intersection in Saigon. He was protesting the persecution of Buddhists by the South Vietnamese government. He sat in the lotus position. A fellow monk poured gasoline over him. Thich Quang Duc struck a match and dropped it on his own lap. The flames engulfed him instantly. But here is the part that defies physics, biology, and logic. As he burned, he did not move. He did not scream. He did not flinch. He sat in perfect, absolute stillness while his body was consumed by fire. photographer named Malcolm Brown snapped a photo. That photo didn't just go viral, it changed the course of history. President John F. Kennedy saw it and said, "No news picture in history has generated so much emotion around the world as that one." It toppled the regime. It stopped the war, at least for a moment. Thich Quang Duc was not trying to build a personal brand. He wasn't trying to sell a course. He used the most extreme signal possible, his own existence, to illuminate a cause. He became the most visible man on earth by destroying himself. I am not asking you to set yourself on fire. Please do not do that. But I am asking you to find something that you care about enough to burn for. Invisibility is safe. It is comfortable. It is the zebra in the herd, but it is a cage. To escape the cage, you must be willing to stand out. You must be willing to face the lions, the critics, and the silence. You must understand the biology of your fear, the physics of your signal, and the architecture of your legacy. The universe is vast, cold, and indifferent. It wants to forget you. Don't let it. Be the glitch. Be the signal. Be the burning monk. Wash your hands.